All right. The first one is risk-free bonds aren't. This whole thing is about how Eliezer's annoyed by the phrase risk-free bonds. He says, America's a young country. He compares it to the lifespan of the Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary. And
Before we get to this, the thing he was particularly annoyed about is that I think this is actually true, the most secure bonds in the world, or what's considered the most secure bonds in the world, are U.S. Treasury bonds. That those are the least likely to default, the least likely to lose value. If you want to put your money in some place that's safe, the very best you can do is buy U.S. Treasury bonds. And for that reason, people sometimes refer to them as risk-free, because the U.S. has never defaulted on its debt, and
yeah, and we don't have a very long history.
Until I remember a presidential candidate 3 years ago was saying, what if we just defaulted on our debt and try and get a better deal?
right?
Yeah.
Not realizing the massive impacts that would have on the world.
Well, it's worked so well for him so far, so.
Yeah, so examples of things that could make these bonds risky. The U.S. is a democracy. Quote, if enough people vote for representatives who decide not to pay off their bonds, they won't get paid. Eliezer mentions a scenario where a populist leader could get voted in who could destroy the economy and cause China to stop buying our bonds. And then also there could be terrorists. And then a global pandemic could hit. And yeah.
He also points out that citing the good track record of the U.S. alone, and not all governments across government histories, the histories of governments existing, is pure survivorship bias. Not even pointing out the lifespan of all governments that have existed since the U.S. government started, right? Just in those 300 years, should at least compare it to other governments that have come and gone in that time period. So you're looking at the one that has survived this whole time and saying, look, that sort of soldier survived the war. Obviously, surviving wars is easy. The same kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about economies or money or investing to answer this, but if the U.S. defaulted on if Treasury bonds defaulted and they were suddenly worth nothing, would $1 still be worth anything? At that stage, isn't all your money fucked basically no matter what, unless you've invested out of country?
No, not necessarily, because $1 at this point is worth whatever people think it's worth. It's just people would think it's worth less once the Treasury defaults on its debt, but it's not necessarily entirely worthless right away.
Okay.
If I was still willing to give you a cup of coffee for $5, then it's still worth a cup of coffee, or 1/5 of a cup of coffee.
Right on.
Eliezer references the Nassim Taleb book Black Swan. I brought that up a little bit earlier, which is about the impact of unknown unknowns. Specifically, this book warns against the dangers of induction, the ludic fallacy, hindsight, and survivorship bias. He pulled out this Taleb quote, instead of putting your money in medium risk investments, you need to put a portion, say 85 to 90%, in extremely safe investments, like treasury bills, as a safe class of instruments as you can manage to find on the planet. The remaining 10 to 15% you put in extremely speculative bets, as leveraged as possible, preferably venture capital style portfolios. That way you don't depend on the errors of risk management. No black swan can hurt you at all, beyond your floor, the nest egg that you have in a maximally safe investment. And then after this, he wonders, did Taleb forget to apply his own principles? And he says, I think if you advise your readers to invest 90% of their money in extremely safe instruments, you should certainly also warn that it had better not all go into the same instrument.
There was a line there, maybe Taleb knows something that I don't, but it seems like he forgot to apply his own tools, the point that he's making to this thing. And I wrote something, but I guess it didn't save when I was doing it earlier, but I couldn't find the exact passage in Methods of Rationality, but where Harry's thinking, it's sadly when we most need our tools that we forget them. And it's, this isn't exactly when you most need it, but the tone of his response to Taleb's quote there felt so resonant that it immediately brought that to mind. But
yeah, the end was
Oh, can I jump in with a
go ahead.
thing? He said, Eliezer said, I anticipate particular black swans, such as AI, nanotech, biotech, that I see as having a high chance of striking over the lifetime of a 30-year treasury bond. But even if you don't share those particular assumptions, do you expect the United States to still be around in 300 years? If not, do you know exactly when it will go bust? Then why isn't the risk of losing your capital on a 30-year treasury bond at least 10%? And, I thought that was both interesting and, again, an insight on his particular worries and the time scale that he's thinking in.
I get to avoid a lot of problems by just not having an investment portfolio. Actually, I do have a small one with Kansas City Life, and they are Rudy Hoffman, again, the cryonics guy that I mentioned before. He sold me just on how awesome Kansas City Life is as an insurance company.
Okay.
They are apparently debt free. They own all of their properties, even like their offices and stuff.
Huh.
And he's like, so even barring like a zombie apocalypse, like they're going to be like the last one to go under because they're not going to default on loans. So my investment is now I pay a higher insurance premium, but when I get to be a certain age, there's like a cash bonus that I get on top. Like it doesn't increase my death payout, but it's money that I can just take whenever I want. So it's very little right up until like I get into my 80s. But if I live to be like in my 90s, it's in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, and he says, and I think near the end, he says the safest instruments you can find on this planet aren't very safe, which is just, a thing that I consider in my life often.
I wonder where Eliezer invests his money. Like, is there safer things than bonds? Like, I get, like, to call them risk-free, he made the very good point that they're not. Yeah. But, like...
The Vanguard Stock Index Fund is pretty good, too. That's another very solid one and is also tied to the U.S. economy. But, again, that has the problem that it's kind of tied to... it's not just the U.S. economy, but much of it is based in the U.S. economy. I mean, part of the problem here is if the U.S. economy goes down, the whole world is going to be seriously fucked.
That quote that you just said started with, there's always risk management, and you're always exposed to error. And both of those alwayses were links to previous sequences. One was the proper use of humility, and then the other was Suyoku Naritai. So, yeah, he's saying we need to get better at and be braver about applying our rationalist principles to real-life scenarios, like investing. And a couple of the comments there's some caveats. TC doesn't think investors literally mean risk-free. It's just an expression of high confidence. Peter McCluskey says, his descriptions of treasury bills as extremely safe seems accurate enough for practical purposes. He also doesn't think that typical investors should follow Taleb's advice, but it seems plausible that some should. And also, good investing is mostly about avoiding big mistakes, not about perfectly avoiding all errors, which I think are good points.
Yeah.
Michael Sullivan said Taleb's advice is extremely faulty, at least for long-run investing. The black swan event that makes a more fully diversified debt equity portfolio fail disastrously in the long term, 20 plus years. This has a fairly high likelihood of taking out a short-term U.S. Treasury portfolio as well. So,
I've got nothing to add since I don't know anything about investing. I never even heard of the Vanguard thing you mentioned.
It's basically just a distributed
diversified
fund
mutual
that buys the 500 biggest companies in the stock market and keeps all their money in them.
I've definitely probably seen the logo, but yeah.
The main difference is that most investment funds are quote unquote managed by someone, which means that there's someone looking at stocks and reading companies' histories and what they're planning to do, and he's like, okay, we should invest in East Asia now, okay, or now we should pull out of East Asia and invest in gold, and now we should pull our money out of gold and invest in stocks instead. So they have, and I mean sometimes they do really well when they guess correctly, but it's basically guessing. And they have high management fees because, you're paying someone to actually do this thinking and managing of the money.
Yeah, you're paying some expert.
Yeah.
Paying some divination expert.
Yeah. Whereas the index fund is literally just trying to get a representative sample of the entire stock market. And so if over the course of 30 years, the stock market increases 2% per year every year, the fund should do more or less the same. It has rock bottom management fees because you're literally doing nothing except for trying to get, one of each of the 500 biggest... I think that's why they call it the Vanguard 500. I could be wrong about that, but it's basically trying to get a representative sample of the entire stock market. And, you're never going to beat the market. You're never going to manage to invest in a ton of money in Google before it goes big or Walmart before it goes big and get these 10,000% returns, but you will steadily follow the market. And over the long run, no one does better than the market on average.
Except for those people that invested in crypto.
That's exactly what I was going to say. On average was your nice caveat that cut me off there. But yeah, some people scored big, which was dope.
Bitcoin was up to 12,000 recently. I think it's up over 10,000 again right now.
God damn it. I sold all my stuff 2 months ago because I got sick of looking at it. It was coming back up finally.
Okay.
And I was like, all right, now I'm only down $600. Because I've been down $1,800 for a year and a half. I'm sick of looking at this 5 times a day. I'm gonna just cut my losses. I'm not gonna look at what my losses or what my potential gains would have been.
If you're investing in something, even Bitcoin, you should never look at it more than like once a month. If you look at it 5 times a day, you're just setting yourself up for this kind of thing.
This was in not Shitty Movie Details, the subreddit. In Movie Details, there's a headline banner coming, like there's a big TV in Times Square, and like the little like news feed along the bottom of news shows. One of like the little spikes was Bitcoin at all-time high, and the very next one was Bitcoin at all-time low. So if you're investing in Bitcoin, you should be checking it 5 times a day.
What good will that help you?
Because then you'll see the 5 hours, or the 5-minute window where it's up, where it's at 12,000 instead of 8,000.
Only if you've pre-committed to sell when it gets to 12,000.
Well, right.
Most people, when it gets to 12,000 over the course of an hour, will be like, "It's gonna keep going. I'm gonna hold on."
That's the mistake I made. What I should have done is listen. I asked my investor, my financial planner friend, what I should do, and he's like, "Here's what you do: commit to a number. When it hits that, sell, and and if it goes below that, sell." And I didn't do that, and I lost money. So, Justin, you were right.
In the past couple days, it's now down to 9,700. Which, like literally a week and a half ago, it was at over 12,000.
Yeah. So, I mean, but, crypto's weird. That's not, I feel like I'm sure there is a special word for that kind of investing. Volatile.
Oh, well, that kind of investing? Risky
gambling.
Yeah.
It's straight up gambling.
Yes,
yeah.
It is.
All right.
That's what you put 10% of your
good.
money into.
I'm actually, so I had Litecoin and Ethereum, and those are actually down substantially from when I sold. So if I held on, I probably would watch them go up for that week, and then like, oh, my number's finally coming in, and then I would have lost it all again. So I can rest easy. All right. Next post?
Yes.
We got correspondence bias, which starts with this quote. The correspondence bias is the tendency to draw inferences about a person's unique and enduring disposition from behaviors that can be entirely explained by the situations in which they occur, which was Gilbert and Malone.
When I learned about this phenomenon, it was in the context of psychology, where they call it the fundamental attribution error.
Yeah, what I pulled out was pretty much right after that. When you yourself kick the vending machine, it's because the bus was late, train was early, report's overdue, and now the damned vending machine ate your lunch money for the 2nd day in a row. We attribute our own actions to our situations, seeing our behaviors as perfectly normal responses to experiences. But when someone else kicks a vending machine, we don't see their past history trailing behind them in the air. We just see the kick for no reason we know about, and we must think they're a naturally angry person, since they lashed out without provocation.
And I think that was almost verbatim rewritten in Methods of Rationality, so hence it's doubly stuck in my head.
Okay.
Yeah, they called it the fundamental attribution error in Methods of Rationality.
Good, yeah.
So, that's how I remember it, even though it's a much longer title.
Right on. Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things that, like, I think makes it really easy to, in a moment, if you have a second to, be reflective and mindful, to, like, not judge people.
Mm-hmm.
If you see consistent bad behavior, then fine. And, like, there are some things where, like, it's hard not to assume they're an asshole. Like, if I see somebody throw, like, a cup of, like, like a soda can out the window while driving, it's hard for me to paint a backstory for them that doesn't make them a jerk.
Yeah.
But you see somebody, I don't know, whatever, be grumpy or something. Where was this very recently? It might have been, it was on Sam Harris's most recent podcast with Ricky Gervais, which was a lot of fun.
Okay.
But he had talked about, I can't remember the specifics, but I had the same thing, like 10 years ago, I was getting glasses. And the woman helping us was being a complete jerk. I can't remember what the specifics were, but she was being so bad that my mom was there helping me buy glasses. This might have been 15 years ago as a teenager. And she was, like, then when that woman left, my mom was telling, like, the other person that was helping us how much the other person was being so unhelpful and mean. And when my mom was telling me that she was going to go tell, like, that she was going to talk about this with the manager or whoever we were talking to next, I was like, you really don't have to. We don't know if they're having, like, a really bad day or something. Mm-hmm. And I used the example, like, maybe their dad just died or something. Like, we don't know. Yeah. And my mom, I think, I didn't do a good job of explaining where I was coming from, but it was more just, like, I wasn't prepared enough to, like, give this person a hard time because, like, I'm never going to see them again, so, like, whatever. But, if someone's being a dick or, being rude or being short or blunt or not responding, to a text or something, like, you don't know what's going on. And it's not necessarily indicative of their underlying personality and hence not a reason to judge them as a person.
Yeah. As the quote says, there's more late buses in the world than mutants born with unnaturally high anger levels.
Yeah, and most people's dispositions aren't going to be that far from average.
Yeah.
So why do we do this thing? Eliezer says it seems quite intuitive to explain rain by water spirits, explain fire by fire stuff like phlogiston, explain the soporific effect of medication by saying it contains a dormitive potency. Or, in other words, people seem to assume that things have these innate traits as another kind of mental shortcut.
Reality usually involves more complicated mechanisms, an evaporation and condensation cycle underlying rain. But mechanisms sound more complicated than essences, they are harder to think of and less available.
That reminds me of what Dan Dennett talked about in Breaking the Spell. It was the hyperactive agency attribution error or something. Or no, it was hyperactive agency attribution something.
So is that like just assuming people have more agency than they might?
So he was talking about it in the context of like assuming agency behind random stuff, like, you know, Thor making rain.
Oh, okay.
Or like when snow falls. The example I remember from the book was like when snow falls off the roof during the winter and the dog gets up and like, who's that barking? What? And it's like, it's nobody. It's snow. Maybe we also attribute too much agency to people from seeing the actions of it, right?
Yeah.
He didn't use it that way in the book, and I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on whether or not he would agree with that assessment, but that seems like the same kind of mistake, right?
Yeah, that matches like my anecdotal experience where you'll like see somebody do something and they're like, oh, they deliberately did that in order to make me feel like that, and like the person didn't even know you were in the room, or.
Yeah. He also brings up the false consensus effect, where people think that others are more likely to respond the same way they do to things. For example, at a university, drinking students considerably overestimated the fraction of fellow students who drink, but non-drinkers considerably underestimated the fraction. So, yeah, most people thought that everyone else was like them, which I think explains a lot with the people who say, I do not understand how, I know we've talked about this before, I do not understand how opposite group could possibly think X, you know? That everyone thinks, you know, most people are much like them, which is not the case.
Yeah, that's. I'm just randomly thinking now. I didn't drink in high school and college, at least not until later in college. But all my friends did, so I don't know what my estimate would have been. I probably would have overestimated because my sample size was, you know, mostly drinkers.
Yeah. Eliezer at the end says, suppose I gave you control with two buttons, a red button and a green button. The red button destroys the world, and the green button stops the red button from being pressed. Which button would you press? The green one. Anyone who gives a different answer is probably overcomplicating the question. And yet, people sometimes ask me why I want to save the world. And I just thought that was interesting, because when you see someone trying to save the world, that is often the thing you think of first, right?
Well, apparently he's run into that. Like, why are you trying to save the world?
Yeah.
What's the thing that we think of first?
Why is someone trying to save the world?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me that's like kind of a no-brainer. But I mean, one of our first 10 episodes was with somebody who wanted to destroy the world.
Yeah, it was.
So, I don't know what to do about. I mean, I almost said I don't know I don't know why he thinks or how he thinks that.
Yeah.
But we did talk about it for an hour and a half, and I get where they're coming from, but I just completely disagree on all accounts. So.
But you do understand why he thinks it, so.
I understand why he says he thinks it.
Right.
I'm not convinced. I mean, and I can't remember if I said this back then or not. I'm not convinced that if they were put in front of this button that they'd press it, because like, assuming they have friends and loved ones, they would all die too. Like, this isn't just like an altruistic good I'm doing for the universe. It's like you're killing everyone you know and love.
It's for the best. In college I was in that same mind space, and I said I would do the same thing. Now I don't want to stick to that. Maybe I would have at the moment like backed down and been like, no, I can't do this. But
I often wonder about like the trolley problem. Like, would I be able to push the fat man to like save the three people? Like, you want to say the correct utilitarian answer, which is yes, one life for three. But like, I don't know.
Like, Stephen, what if you see someone like was just fatally injured, is in horrible, crippling agony on the street? You know they're going to bleed out in about an hour and a half, and it is impossible to save their lives. Like, literally impossible. They're going to die. Is it a better thing to just end them quickly and mercifully now so they don't have that hour and a half of agony first?
I still wouldn't press the red button.
No, but would you, with that one person, would you do that?
I know, but I'm challenging the analogy you're making.
Well, no, it's a very simple analogy when you think that everyone in the world is in that position. and that position is inevitable consequence of being alive and conscious.
But most of us are enjoying the ride most of the time, right?
Yeah.
But
you don't understand that when you're in that mind space.
But yeah, so to run at the point, totally. If I was on the battlefield and my comrade had just been shot and or bayoneted and like, yep, we're never gonna be able to get you. I would like to think I could mercy kill them.
Yeah.
So, or at least I would think it's the right thing to do. I wouldn't stop somebody else from doing it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So.
I like to focus on the part of that question about the button, which was saying that you're just oversimplifying the problem or the question. I forget.
Overcomplicating.
Overcomplicating, yeah. I think this is probably true of a lot of these cases where we are kind of looking at someone and trying to figure out what's going through their mind, why they did that thing. And I'm thinking about Alain de Botton, who is he's got like some books and TED Talks, and he's the founder of something called the School of Life, which is this cool school designed to teach people like the stuff they don't teach you in school. One of the things that he had talked about on a interview that I was listening to with him was the idea that often like somebody's in a really bad mood and we're like, oh, maybe they have clinical depression and they need antidepressants, or it might be because this thing happened earlier that day, and then like he's like, but like, did you ask them if they're hungry? He says, when you think of a child who's having a tantrum, like you wouldn't be like, did something really bad happen to this child early this day and it's still on his mind, and then also this other thing, and then maybe he has clinical depression. Like you'd be like, is this kid hungry? Does he need a nap?
Yeah.
Kind of interesting that we don't do that with adults, even though very often like the reason that someone's in a bad mood might be because they need a nap or because they're hungry.
Yeah.
It's like usually maybe it's just a much more simple explanation.
I like that, and this actually relates to the same coworker who's raising his daughter in that really cool way. He mentioned that, like, so usually if we go out to like the office caters lunch on Wednesdays, and so or pays for it, we go get it ourselves. But he'll usually save a portion to eat right before his train/bike ride home, because he says I realized like some time ago that if I just didn't eat like from lunch to like when I got home, I'd come home hangry and I wouldn't notice, like, and eventually he noticed like I'm just pissed until I sat down and had something to eat. So he's like, now I just take care of it before I leave for work or leave for home. That's and awesome. So it is a super mundane explanation. And it's, could have been a fine day or whatever. So I like that. Yeah. You could be painting some elaborate backstory, but that's a really good way to think about it. It's like, are they hungry? Maybe a headache, like just, some super mundane thing. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Kind of helps as a strategy to try to knock out some of the low-hanging fruit too. In the comments, Robin Hanson said, the less you know about someone's personality, the more you should infer about their personality from their behavior. So it's reasonable to infer more from their behavior, from the behavior of others, than yourself. The problem instead seems to be overconfidence. We infer far more than is reasonable, given only a small behavior sample. And then the rest of the comments section devolves into pro-singularity versus anti-singularitarian arguments because of the would you push the button thing,
right.
Which I don't want to get into.
No.
So
that's there if you want to read that.
So Hanson's point is that, I mean, yeah, it's Bayesian evidence of their personality, but it's weak Bayesian evidence. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fine. That's not so much of a disagreement as it is, yeah, like you said, caveat. Technically the point, yeah. I mean, if someone's doing dick things, it is more likely that they're a dick than that they're not, assuming you know nothing else about them.
Right.
Right.
But remember that it's weak evidence because you only have this one data point.
Exactly.
Neat. Leave it to Robin Hanson to always, add some subtlety.
This is sort of related just to personality stuff. I never watched Mr. Rogers. As a kid, somehow I missed it. I was aware that it existed, but I watched pointless TV and not wholesome television. And over the last couple of weeks, have just been like, maybe I should watch that movie that Tom Hanks did.
Seen that?
No, I'm sure it'd make me cry and be amazing.
Won't You Be My Neighbor?
Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
I think so.
Okay.
But the person of Mr. Rogers, from my model of him, is, and like I've read anecdotes on Reddit and short snippets. He just seemed like the embodiment of wholesomeness. Yeah. And it's like knowing that a person like that existed means that it's possible to be that kind of person. Right. And I find that really attractive, like just in an inspiring sort of way. And I'm currently in the process of working out like how to integrate, not going full Rogers because I don't know how I would do that. But
I think you need a sweater vest.
Yeah, then I'll never make it. It's 90 something degrees out today, but I don't know. I think this is totally unrelated to the podcast in general, but just for me, I'm trying to find ways in my life to be like just more genuinely wholesome, like when I interact with other people, and like, you know, unless it's like good-natured counter signaling, like with friends or something, like jokes like that, like just little things like never giving people a hard time or making them feel bad, or like being, I don't know, like bizarrely compassionate. There was like an anecdote I read where somebody came, like they were on the show and their little sister came with, but they were like too young to go on stage or something, and she was like on the stage, like on the side of the lines, like crying.
Oh.
And not because she was sad, like because she wasn't on the show. She was just overwhelmed. She was a big fan and stuff.
Okay.
And apparently this person's recollection was like, he like knelt down, put his hand on her shoulder, and was like, what's wrong? Like, let's talk. You know, why are you feeling this way? And like that level of approach is just so inspiring. I mean, I can imagine. I'm looking forward to being around my niece when she's throwing a tantrum. It'll be much easier for me to do the Rogers thing because she's not constantly doing it to me.
Yeah. And you
But-
aren't sleep deprived. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, when you're the parent and they're exhausting you all the time, it's different. But I'm going to try something like that when this happens in my life and see how it works. Like, you know, again, they're probably just hungry or something, right? It's probably some bullshit thing where, you know, the kid doesn't know that they're upset because they missed lunch or something, right?
That's why
But-
cool uncles increase the survival odds of a tribe.
Perfect.
Parents wouldn't murder their own children out of frustration as much.
It's a really good Evo Psych theory, actually.
There we go. I love it. And that means that I'm still contributing to the success of my species, even if I don't have kids.
Absolutely.
Just be nice to kids.
Yeah.
All right. So,
So for next time?
Yep.
For next time, we will be reading the posts, Are Your Enemies Innately Evil? ? And also, 2 more things to unlearn from school.